North Laos. A threatened people break the silence of a quiet war. That war is being won. This film is concerned with how a people learn to win a war. When the French lost Dien Bien Phu in 1954, their Indochina empire disintegrated into 4 states: North Vietnam, South Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. Laos was the least ready for independence. A patchwork of princes ruled this undeveloped land. Here, less than 3 million people of many different tribes lived in a country the size of England. Historically marched across and fought over, Laos lay locked in a quiet war of foreign ambition. A war made quiet by the land itself. A war fought for the minds of men. North Vietnam supported the Lao communists over a border that existed only on maps. They had to protect their foothold in the north and the Ho Chi Minh Trail to South Vietnam. Opposing the communists was a succession of weak governments able to control little beyond the Mekong River Valley. In late 1960, in the administrative capital of Vientiane, a neutralist coup d'etat upset the delicate balance of power. But the Lao army soon forced the neutralists to withdraw. They moved to meet a communist column coming south. They converged on the high plateau of the Plain des Jars, still held by 2 battalions of the Lao army. This historic crossroads of peoples and roots in the north had been ruled for centuries by Vietnamese. A contested country full of bitter memories. The Lao army commander, claiming sudden illness, fled toward the Mekong River without firing a shot. The panicked people were left to make whatever peace they could. But one Lao army officer chose to stay behind. With a few men, he rallied the people and led them south toward safety. This young officer and most of the people were male. A proud and independent mountain tribe who clung closely to land and family. But with the coming of the communists came the shadow of North Vietnam. The young officer saw that he could not hold back the stronger enemy. Legend would later say that he cried all one night for his country and his people. He sent a plea to the South. It reached men who were concerned. Days later, on a makeshift airfield, a promise of help was made for a promise of men. Neither man was sure what the other man could do. Cajoling, arguing, ordering, the young officer led his people back to the high country south of the Plain des Jars and a village called Pha Dong. His name was Vang Pao. Born near the Plain des Jars, a guerrilla soldier for 15 years and wounded 3 times. He gained his reputation and experience with the French in the war for Indochina. A lieutenant colonel at 31, he said a man must make his life by 35. A charismatic, passionate, and committed man. A patriot without a country. In early 1961, an armed people stood and fought at Pha Dong, the alternative to running. An incident, a reason, a people, a leader. The genesis of a resistance. They fought for the land they had lost. They fought for the families they still had. They fought for the independent life they knew. They fight for the same things and more today. To understand the new kind of war that began at Pha Dong, you must begin with the Mekong River. On its banks live the lowland Lao, where they took refuge from China 1,000 years ago. To survive among stronger neighbors, they fashioned a defense of time, compromise, and doing business with passing conquerors. They had little interest in defending the vast mountain country or the many tribes that lived beyond the Mekong River Valley. The Lao army preferred to patrol the peaceful Mekong to fighting for the Plain des Jars. Its loss was muted and distant. Just another incident in the quiet war that had sputtered since the fall of Dien Bien Phu. Only when the Mekong River Valley itself was threatened would the Lao people really fight for their country. To get to the quiet war, you must walk for days or fly for hours. These mountains go up 9,000 feet and go on and on, one after another. East to the coast of Vietnam, north far into China. Man has small impact here. You would find the Lao government in isolated outposts or on forgotten mountains. A forbidding country to live in, a forbidding country to fight in. Here the Lao army tried to defend the French legacy of frontier forts in a country that has no border. You would find the war the communists fought in the layers of different tribes that the Lao did not care about. In houses on stilts in the cramped upland valleys live the Lao Tung. Originally lowland people from the south, they were pushed into the hills by the Lao, who called them savages. Here they survived, a simple, ignorant people, without cohesion and amenable to any master. In villages above 3,000 feet, the Mayo live in houses built on the ground. Their old men say that they came from a land in China as narrow as the trail a deer can walk on. They began moving south when their land gave out and the Chinese threatened their independent way of life. They arrived in Laos 100 years ago. Here they found a rich land, hillsides for dry mountain rice, high valleys for corn, opium to be traded for silver. The villages grew and made what they needed. With simple flintlocks, they hunted game and tried to keep strangers at bay. They made a home here. There are no more mountains to the south. The monsoon comes in June and rains 8 feet through November. Time in the hills is measured by the seasons. Distance is the number of days walking on a trail. To the people in the hills, the communists came many seasons past. To the valleys, only days away. First, the civilians came. They promised medicine for the sick, schools for the children. No one had ever offered help before. Wary and unsure, the people let the communists come. Then the patrols came. The helping turned to taking rice and animals. The schools for children became the army. The hospitals treated the sick with propaganda. Men were forced to be unpaid coolies. To resist was to disappear, for straightening a crooked capitalist finger. With no alternative, the village silently submitted and closed grimly on itself. But when word came that Vang Pao had stood and fought at Pha Dong, the village found a choice. The people came to talk, to fight and risk everything, or to stay out and keep something. A decision as difficult for these people as for any man, any place. The decision to resist was made by men who felt themselves too threatened to do nothing. At Pha Dong, Vang Pao offered people the alternative to running. Here, what happened at Pha Dong offered people the alternative to being alone. a leader went to find Vang Pao. The Mayo walked fast. Vang Pao sends word to build an airfield and collect men to be armed. He will come. Vang Pao flies in the first plane. This is part of leadership. Vang Pao is a unique man. He said that when he started working for the people, he stopped listening to his wives, all 4 of them. He talks of communism. It is mostly family feuds or being in the wrong village at the wrong time. So he fights with politics and psychology, as well as guns. Choosing the time to arm people is like picking fruit or a wife. Too early, and they're not ready. Too late, and the enemy already have them. The plane is specially designed for short fields at high altitude. Landings are tricky, for the wind always blows. A field worse than this, the pilots call agony. Vang Pao begins by making contact with people. No man too small to fight. No man too small to listen to. This, too, is part of leadership. He talks of the war in the language of the hills. The Lao government treated them as hunting dogs. But to trust a communist is to sleep with a tiger. He understands their thinking and half believes himself in the spirits and spells of their animism. The people will fight only for what they know. He will help the village fight for village things. A contract of equals. They can be taught little by little to grow and fight for something larger. He begins by putting China in the next valley. But he has brought strong friends to help them. The plane makes only one pass, but the enemy in the valley are alerted. Special packing protects the weapons. This man has never seen a modern rifle. He knows only his flintlock. The training team comes with Vang Pao. They have been specially trained in this new kind of war. The citizen army is eager and curious. They can get anything apart, but putting it back together again is something else. The spirits of their ancestors who fought so well for the Khans might be slightly embarrassed. There is a limit to what they can learn now. They're taught simple things. They begin with the M1 rifle. They are difficult to train. This man has his own ideas on how it should be done. Many of the leaders are old. They rigidly follow their tribal customs. The opium they smoke will destroy them. As soldiers, they will tire easily and become careless and unreliable. But they are the men who made the choice, and the village needs them now. The people will not yet follow an outside man. The village can fight well only if village leaders learn to lead in war. The airfield makes a good drill field. Only some have uniforms now. If they do well, they will get more later. Old hunters handle M1s like flintlocks. The M1 is better than the carbine. It has the range and accuracy to hit a man across a valley. The people are independent. They will fight as individuals. That can be strength or weakness, depending on the leader. It's a family affair. Women cut targets of cardboard from butter oil boxes. Surplus guns, surplus butter. There is only one war here. Lists of people are made. They must be organized, for they are the target of the enemy. The men will not fight without their families. There are no secure areas to the rear. There is no rear. The people are given something for having made a choice. A pot, a plate, some cooking oil, soap, a blanket. A school begins. A literate soldier will be the first teacher. A dispensary is built. With simple drugs, a medic breaks the hold of communists and witch doctors. The gear for the radio team arrives. The people think Vang Pao's spirit is in that black box. But at Vang Pao's headquarters, their messages will turn a dot on the map into people. Caravans of traders leave for the valley towns. While bartering their goods, they will watch and listen for the enemy. The enemy cannot move quietly. A prisoner is caught. He says the enemy are moving toward the village. They will attack at night. The training speeds up. New weapons are introduced. The Browning automatic rifle, light and simple, good for ambushing trails. 30 caliber light machine guns, more complicated, more difficult to handle. A defensive weapon for the village. There is still time to think up games with guns. Grenades. They will be used more on trails as booby traps than in combat. The instructors have the people's confidence. They are better than foreigners at guiding people learning to resist. But the people learn to use grenades for fishing by themselves. The 57mm recoilless rifle is the ideal weapon for guerrillas. It is portable and powerful, but no match for the Russian 82 that the enemy may have. They learn to handle mortars with aiming stakes, but also with their thumbs. The mortar round makes a big bang. Among the superstitious people that fight this war, big bangs have a power of their own. Training becomes more real. And slides into operations. The enemy attacks just before dawn. Battle is over. She will be buried when all her relatives in the distant villages gather to touch her again. She will be buried with the traditional paper money and the felt shoes of the dead. The pig will accompany her spirit on its journey to the place where she was born. The battle did not last long. The enemy withdrew back to their valley. A great victory that no one but the village will remember. Small wars in many villages. Each grew in its own way. The word spread from mountain to mountain. Progress is having parachute rigging for swings, or eating a cucumber in the open. May 1961. Vang Pao has 5,000 guerrillas and 50,000 people in the mountains near Pha Dong. June 1961. Pha Dong finally falls after a major enemy effort, but the resistance survives. It grows like roots where people are willing. Groups of villages become zones. Radios and airfields link one to another. June 1962. 15,000 guerrillas and 100,000 people now ring the Plain des Jars. The communist masters of guerrilla warfare hold old French forts and valley towns. They are supplied by old French roads from North Vietnam. They are forced to fight with old French methods. An ironic twist of history. October 1962. The Geneva Convention establishes a ceasefire and a coalition government of pro-communist, neutralist, and anti-communist factions. An international control commission is named to see that all foreign troops withdraw and that all foreign support ceases. Vang Pao orders the guerrillas to fight only if attacked. They are to watch the North Vietnamese who do not go home. The resistance becomes a refugee relief program and has to survive on the edge of collapse. To avoid publicity, the public headquarters of Vang Pao is moved from the capital of Vientiane to Sam Tong, already a refugee relief center. The military headquarters is moved to Long Chen. A handful of people live beside the airfield in this forgotten valley. The barest essentials to keep the resistance alive are moved in. It began in one tent with 5 radios and a few barely educated boys who ate, slept, and worked here. Their messages reassured worried and beleaguered people in villages throughout the north. High ridges hid what looked like just another refugee village. Yet somehow 4 years later, that cluster of huts has become the 3rd largest city in Laos. A megalopolis faced with urban sprawl and boasting the most reliable electrical system in the country. Some of that power went to operate a sophisticated radio net with 200 operators manning over 50 stations. But not all the messages were serious. I, Company Commander Long, have only one wife. Request you drop soonest black cloth and whiskey to buy second wife. In the sparse days after Geneva, there was little outside help. The people had to use their own initiative to find their own solutions. They even developed unique styles of architecture. Gas barrel Baroque, ammo crate Classical, tin sheet Palladian. When Vang Pao's house was built, it served as a war room, a town hall, even a social center. The unique focus of the Lao government in this new kind of war. Characteristic of the man, he built the more elaborate gray house on the right for visitors. The families of leaders were brought to Long Chen. They would be safe here. For the first time, men began to trust someone else to protect what they fought for. Long Chen became a city of women and children. By protecting these families, Vang Pao strengthened his political appeal. The war never really stopped. In 1963, less than a year after the Geneva Convention, the uneasy alliance between the communists and neutralists disintegrated. The neutralists were driven off the Plain des Jars. They had to ask for Vang Pao's help. Old enemies became wary partners when the communists brought the war back to Laos. The resistance began to grow again. In the northeast, the traditional stronghold of the communists, thousands of men were armed. North of Luang Prabang, the royal capital, people in the middle of communist territory asked to join Vang Pao. January 1965. The resistance is 4 years old. 20,000 guerrillas protect 300,000 people. The Lao government makes Vang Pao a general in the army. Gaps are filled, but expansion is slower. Growth is measured by improving what exists. When the war began again, the airfields were improved and the planes returned. Most airports, as busy as Longchen, have concrete runways and fancy terminals. These planes bring rice and supplies. Over 1,000 tons arrive and leave each month. Smaller aircraft resupply the little Longchens that were established as friendly territory grew. Isolated outposts near the front are supported by helicopter. From the few who had an education, an unusual staff developed. They learned to handle the problems of a people bearing arms. They support the unique needs of a division of guerrillas. They pay 20,000 men fairly and honestly. They care for the wants of several 100,000 people. They exploit the sources of information available on the enemy. Debriefing of an agent. Interrogation of a prisoner. Intelligence on where the enemy is and what he might do. Good information. Good communication, good support. This is the difference between small villages and a stronger enemy. In northern Laos, this is the way the quiet war is being won. In Vientiane, 1,500 tons of rice each month are loaded into old cargo planes of contract airlines. It is the difference between staying or running for 120,000 refugees. A prearranged signal is put out, or all the villages look alike. It tells the pilot the village is still in friendly hands. It may be the oldest established permanent flying propaganda game in Asia, but in this war, what falls from an airplane is as important as what grows from the muzzle of a gun. Refugees have come to the village. They come in families and in small groups. Each year, 50,000 people come to hundreds of villages like this. They come with nothing. They could not wait for the resistance to come to them. The men of the village have been armed for several years now. Some, mostly the old men and old leaders, have succumbed to age, opium, and whiskey. They continue to fight as they always fought, only as individuals, only when needed. They are the home guard. Most of the younger men are full-time soldiers. They have learned to fight as companies with men from other villages and follow outside leaders. The commander of the zone has several of these companies to fight the local enemy. The dilemma of the village war is that these guerrillas must defend a land and people regular armies usually protect. Younger men trained at Longchen now share authority with older local leaders. The refugees must begin work on new fields and homes. A few give up, too tired or too lazy or too afraid the enemy will come. But most will try to start a new life. Until then, they must be fed. There is often not enough rice. It is carefully controlled. A cup for each person, about £1 a day. Only half of what they used to have, but enough until they have grown their own. In this war, people cannot be given all they ask for. There can be no charity, even with food. A balance must be reached to keep alive the hope, but not destroy the quest for that new life. The seriously sick and wounded come to Sam Tong. The San Suk Hospital stands for another side in this new kind of war. It replaced the old dispensary, which had bamboo walls and a dirt floor. There are 100 beds and often twice that many patients. Local girls learn to be nurses. Here, half the children die before they are 2. The hospital has an X-ray machine and operating room. It is directed by a Lao doctor married to a Mayo girl. The medical program is built on thousands of people in distant villages. They are afraid. They believe that when the spirits leave the body, they will get sick. They don't understand his medicine, yet they come and ask for his help. They trust him because they know he is concerned. This kind of concern supports the kind of trust that leads to commitment. The quiet war must have a committed people. It was livestock, not opium, that made the Plain des Jars and the Mayo rich. But the animals were lost to the enemy. A new herd was begun near Sam Tong. Vang Pao helped bring livestock back to the hills. At a model farm at Long Chen, American pigs have been brought in. It isn't easy to put meat on flabby local porkers. Ducks from Thailand do well, despite a harsh climate. Here we are, sports fans, at the Sam Tong Stampede. Would you believe roping a water buffalo with a parachute sling lasso? It is even money. The world record of 5 minutes and 22 seconds still stands. Time was bought for Long Chen and Sam Tong by the fighting in distant villages. Time to grow things, time to sell things, time to build markets for this little piggy to go to. There is money now. Soldiers are paid about $10 a month, but a pig still costs a couple of months' pay. To bring in basic necessities at low prices, a trading association has been established. Its capital came from the small contributions of many villages. The old merchant families lost their monopoly and threatened Vang Pao's leadership. The resistance has its war profiteers. But Vang Pao had to risk the support of a few for the allegiance of many, because markets are a part of this war. Almost any hour of the day you can get a bowl of noodles or shop for a full-course meal. Aged whiskey, 2 days old, for the cocktail hour. A T-bone steak coming up. Garden greens for a salad. Japanese beer to top it off. The traders go back to the villages with cloth, soap, tools, cigarettes, flashlights, even transistor radios. Some must wait for a plane. Home may be over 100 miles away and surrounded by enemy. In the north, there are 130 schools. They teach 16,000 children from every tribe. They begin with a rice sack for a desk. A new way of life is being taught here. The war broke down old tribal customs. What began as a male resistance at Pha Dong became something fought for by many tribes. The old embittered leaders did not see this change coming and did not want it. But Vang Pao's hope from the beginning was an idea, and he called that idea a union of Lao races. A common enemy gave life to this idea in war, but when peace comes, to keep this idea alive, children must now be taught to be citizens of Laos. The older children go to grade school in Sam Tong. They learn one language. They must be able to speak as Lao. They learn one country and one government. There can be no tribal autonomy. They learn one king. He stands for a union that can be. The teachers are young and barely trained, but they were soldiers. They understand the idea. In Bangkok, Thailand, sons of the most important leaders go to school. Here they can learn of the West without forgetting who they are or where they will return to. From these children will come the leaders who will follow Vang Pao. What they are learning will keep the guns of the resistance from threatening the country that it saved. The idea of a union of Lao races is spread to the people. Posters tell of the return of the Lao government to the north. Leaflets are dropped to uncommitted villages. The idea will be carried to enemy areas by word of mouth. But most of the people are illiterate, and schools are only for the young. To reach these people, some deep in communist territory, a radio station was built. It is called the Union of Lao Races Radio. Programs in Meo, Lao Tung, and Lao are broadcast daily. Accurate news about the war counters enemy propaganda that the friendly cause is hopeless. Tape recordings from defectors let their comrades know that they have been well treated. She sings of love and war, and in her ballad weaves the hope for a united land. The radio was not needed when men fought only for what they knew. But now, men must get used to being part of something larger. A road is started toward the south. It begins at Sam Tong. Two 5,000-foot ridges must be crossed before reaching Longchen. 100 miles more, and it will reach the Mekong Valley. Young men are taught to be engineers and drive bulldozers. When the king first traveled this road, he said it was only fit for mountain goats. People come from great distances just to see the road. Merchants travel on it. Refugees settle by it. Pilots call it Skyline Drive and use it for navigation. The road has impact on everyone. It cannot be shot. It cannot be eaten. It is something the people understand. It will one day reach other roads in the Mekong Valley. It will bring by truck what now must come by air. It began nowhere in war and is built toward a time of peace. It will last. But there are other roads in the north, enemy roads. They must be watched. A special road watch team has been trained. They are being infiltrated. They are left at a village deep in enemy territory. Local people are friendly here, but the enemy is close. The road is 2 days away. This footage was taken by a member of the team with a simple movie camera. Identification cards of enemy trucks have code names. A Russian Gaz-63 is called a fish for radio transmission. 25 fish moving west on Route 7 from North Vietnam. Villagers say truck park located at UG 6066, 100 meters south of the old rice mill at Ban Li Neng. The destroyed trucks become symbols on a map. In the Mekong River Valley, the progress of the war is watched. The support for this new kind of war, from the bulldozers that build roads to the planes that destroy them, is unique and staggering. Yet all this would be wasted if the wrong approach were used. The men who have come to help plan a program strong enough to last, yet simple enough to leave behind. They can only guide the local leaders to create that program. They can only train the local men to make that program strong. Together, they work for that day they won't be needed. To persuade but not command. It is better with few men. Ordinary men, but given the responsibility to do many things and be many people. They must stay close to that lean life the people lead. Stay there long enough to be well understood. Stay there long enough to be involved, yet know the limits of involvement. Stay there long enough to record a unique history. Stay there long enough to understand and have a sense of humor. Stay there long enough to help this man grow and accomplish extraordinary things. It took 15 years to build a cadre for this new kind of war. 100 of these men have been here from the start. Led by men like this one, they helped fashion something new. Built on Western techniques with Asian innovations, they could adapt to village ways and do what no foreigner could do. But many of the best are dead, like this man. They start with young men in villages and teach them to be soldiers. They give a touch of discipline to men whose strength is independence. They teach the men the tactics for the war that's being fought. They take the brightest boys and teach them to be leaders. These will be the cadre when the men who teach them now go home. They begin with the English alphabet. In 6 months, a man can operate a radio. Some things they teach take years. In the development of North Laos, these pilots will be needed. The cadre teach new skills in homemade ways. And when they are finished, they turn their students back to local leaders to command. The product of their work is men both confident and proud. In 1965, the enemy brought in a new army to fight in Laos. With the dry winds of winter, soldiers from North Vietnam came to save the quiet war the Lao communists had lost. They came in lines of trucks at night. They brought their own coffins. They had to protect their roads and valleys in the mountains belonging to the Mao. In the country near the border, the war became a battle for these roads. With the dry season every year, they begin by battering the village companies back into the mountains. But once in the hills, the enemy drive falters, and the war slows into a stalemate. When monsoon rains turn enemy roads to mud, Vang Pao begins to move. Vang Pao comes to the high mountains where the village companies have withdrawn. These men could handle Lao communists, but they are no match for Vietnamese battalions. Vang Pao tells them to infiltrate the enemy rear and collect intelligence. When you fight the Vietnamese, he warns, have more tricks than the hairs on your head. Vang Pao gives money to the wives of village soldiers. While their homes are being fought for, women and children must go to the rear. Against this enemy, families cannot fight together. Vang Pao orders in 2 battalions from Long Chen. They are part of a special intervention force created to fight the Vietnamese. They were organized as a battalion from the best of village companies. Conventional weapons are used in new ways. A 105mm howitzer arrives piece by piece. A helicopter brought it in from a nearby mountain. Surplus Air Force rockets find new uses. When fired from homemade launchers, they have great, if inaccurate, range. The target is enemy concentrations near the road. Confused and frightened, the enemy will say they are missiles from America. The 1st Battalion moves out. They break up in small groups. They fight best as guerrillas. They will surround the enemy and force them to collect on top of the hill. Vietnamese resupply columns will be ambushed. Water will be cut off. Radios will ensure good tactical communication. While the men move up, civilians in the rear carry supplies with the lifeless lethargy of people who have moved too often. The enemy is reported to be digging in on the hill. Vang Pao's instinct for timing and tactic is sure. The 2nd Battalion will attack the hill. These men come from many tribes and many places. They began fighting in village companies, in local village wars. So they know why this mountain is important to the people that used to live here. And they understand that by fighting for villages they do not know, it somehow protects their own, many miles away. But the Vietnamese are tenacious and dig in deeper. Something more is needed. The enemy, badgered into a hilltop stronghold, is exposed and vulnerable to air. These are old training planes, converted T-28s flown by Laos pilots. A unique situation. Guerrillas with close air support. But the highly disciplined Vietnamese put up curtains of small arms fire. The enemy score, one success. But the attack goes on. Guerrilla groups close in. Recoilless rifles and mortars give them cover. The hill is theirs again. Most of the Vietnamese are still here. Their ability and motivation gave them a fearsome reputation among the people of these mountains. But the only human things left are letters from home and photographs. And all that remains of a legendary enemy are notebooks of self-criticism and artillery trigonometry. Strange men dead in a strange place. Invaders who tried coercion to win the quiet war. This is the price of failure. 9,000 men lost each year. The last message from their commander said they would be heroes in North Vietnam. But they will be buried in nothing Vietnamese, not even in the coffins they brought with them. The spirits of old friendly dead are placated. Months ago, when the enemy took this hill, the men who died could not be buried. Now their spirits may leave in peace. Captured enemy weapons, Russian and Chinese made. They are more than trophies. They will replace some of the weapons friendly troops have lost or broken. The men make a new home on the hill that looks like any other. Soon they will move on. They will take back the rest of the land that was lost to the Vietnamese. And maybe one ridge more. When the enemy attacks next dry season, they will have to start closer to North Vietnam. Quick evacuation of the wounded and fast medical attention keep friendly losses to a minimum. This strengthens the kind of commitment needed to fight this war. A commitment that began with old opium smokers fighting only for themselves. The commitment that grew with the slow, arduous teaching of men to fight for something larger. The commitment that leads men to risk everything for other men. The line of that commitment is direct and unbreakable. This man was a lowland Lao, a colonel under Vang Pao who died trying to rescue a downed American pilot. A Lao fighting beside the Mayo, dying for an American. A great fighter, a better leader, a man much like Vang Pao. There will be others like him. Other men come home to small villages. 3,000 dead or wounded every year, every seventh man. No one counts the civilians. Most don't die in big battles that win something. Most die in small places to single bullets or forgotten mines. What eats at the will is that they are not really soldiers, nor are they a warring people. Yet the war has brought a better life. And for a week late each year, after the rice harvest is in, that better life can be enjoyed. The war stops for the Mayo New Year. There are new clothes and all the family silver to wear. There are girls to court while catching, or the other way around. There are games to play. There's the visit of the royal family. And the chance to feel there really is a union of Lao races. There are medals to be given, a chance to be distinguished in a war with little glory. And after the ceremonies are over, the serious business of forgetting the war begins. The new year ends. The planes go home. There are limits to what they can do. The war will go on, but a better life will go on too. That alternative that began at Pha Dong now grows beyond commitment. Vang Pao would say that it grows like a plant. Well fed, it will grow faster. Well protected, it will grow strong. Well guided, it will grow better. But it must do the growing by itself and cannot be changed into something it is not. Down there, it grows towards something, like that prophetic road that, too, began nowhere. From man to man, from village to village, from mountain to mountain. It makes each important. Men talk of it long, long into the night.